Hello friends, family, fellow patriots. Lord Stompy here. Welcome to the show. This video is part 2 on the liberal high IQ delusion myth. Okay, so part 1, I was discussing how in modern liberalism there's a central myth that's very much a foundation of modern liberal society, and the idea is that the more people we have who are basically a high IQ intelligentsia class, the better the outcomes for Western society are going to be. So there's this idea that we have to create this large class of basically technocrats, and the more technocrats we have, the more of these systems manipulators that we have, the better the quality of life and the better the outcomes are going to be for Western people as a whole. Now, this is clearly not the case at this point in time here in Western civilization. We have more people working in these technocratic jobs than ever. We have deindustrialized our Western nations. We have lost our muscle and might when it comes to building the foundations of our own country. We are now struggling to build the infrastructure, the very basic infrastructure of our Western nations. This is a huge problem. At the same time, there has never been larger amounts of these so-called high IQ technocrats. And most of these technocrats are relatively peripheral to our needs as part of European civilization. Most of these technocrats are just they're clerks, they're paper shufflers, they're not adding value to our society in any particular meaningful way. And in my last video, I was talking about what happens with late stage empires, and this is the stage that we are at now. What happens with late stage empires that have a high degree of intelligence is very common for the intelligentsia classes to become so self-serving and so myopic that they end up becoming a cancer, a burden upon their civilization, and they can no longer recognize the warning signs when their nations are facing imminent collapse. They can no longer read situations correctly. For all their intelligence, they're unable to process basic fundamental information that is crucial to the survival of an empire. So I discussed all of these issues in my first video. I want to explode this high IQ myth a little bit more in this second video. So one of my regular subscribers, the Separatist, he pointed out in the comments section that high IQ today doesn't mean what high IQ meant 100 years ago. And he's actually correct. So 100 years ago, the measure of intelligence was actually it was generally somebody who was intelligently creative, and they were creating their ideas and their inventions and their innovations were creating better pathways within European society and better options that overall did benefit European society, and they improved the overall well-being of European society. So being a high IQ person 100 years ago, we're talking about actual inventors who came up with inventions such as the light globe or the car or machinery to plow the land. All these kind of things added a huge amount of value. We're also talking about 100 years ago, we're talking about town planners who built the great cities, and we're talking about great statesmen, right? 100 years ago, politics was a lot more about the art of being a great statesman than just serving these short-term election cycles and basically not thinking into the future in any meaningful way at all. Our modern politicians cannot look at a future 50 years ahead and plan for that because the rigors, the cutthroat nature of modern politics, the sheer bastardry of modern politics, the short-term election cycles, and the complete corruption within the modern liberal system is such that modern politicians spend all their time occupied with contingencies to stay in power. Their main contingency is just to hold on to their position within this technocratic hierarchy, and therefore they cannot serve any greater purpose, and they cannot plan or think more than 5 years ahead because that would require too much vision and energy, and it would require too much coordinated, constructive, creative effort to plan ahead and build a better future for our European people. So what we're looking at here is 100 years ago, IQ actually was something that was very important because it was something that was very different. It actually, IQ used to mean someone who applied their intelligence in a meaningful way to solving society's problems. Now, IQ is basically being turned into the ability to manipulate society's structures so that you remain in your technocratic position of power. So what we've seen is this transformation of the intelligentsia class here in the West. 100 years ago, they did actually add a lot more value. They were a lot more intelligent, and that they were a very important class of people. Now, the majority of the intelligentsia class have been turned into shit-lib technocrats, and essentially they've become a self-serving machine within the body of society, and they've become parasites that are devouring the very structure of the society that they're meant to uphold and protect. So over the years, I've even noticed this transformation myself. I'm 51 years old, and back in the 1980s, when Australia was a lot more sane, we believe it or not, we were quite a lot more based back in the 1980s. So your average middle class person back then, they didn't think about things such as gay rights or refugee rights. They didn't think about feminism. All these issues were very, very minor back in the 80s. So your average middle class technocrat or whatever, just your average person in the intelligentsia, in the middle classes, they would just trot off to work, fill out all the papers that needed filling out, submit plans, do whatever they had to do to make sure that the gears of society kept functioning. And now I look back over the timeline of my life. It was in the 90s I noticed suddenly all these peripheral agendas and arguments began to really invade into the middle class intelligentsia's thinking. So suddenly, in the 90s, we had a massive upsurge in this idea that gay people were oppressed, and that the middle classes supposedly had a moral mandate. They were morally obliged to go in and start pushing the liberation of gays as part of this agenda. And at the same time, in the 90s, I remember here in Australia we had a nationalist politician, Pauline Hanson, and she came out saying, oh, we have to cut off all this foreign immigration, blah, blah, blah. Well, suddenly, for the first time in my life, a huge swathe of the younger middle class liberals all began screaming hysterically that when not only was foreign immigration a wonderful thing, and that it was racist to have any control over your nation's immigration policies, suddenly all these young liberals were talking about the rights of man, and all people in the world are one, and that we have to stand up for the rights of Chinese people, Indians, all these minority people that back in the 1980s, no one was really particularly concerned to a large degree. These issues were very marginal in the 80s. So what you saw with the middle classes, with the intelligentsia here in the West, was suddenly they got turned into a crowd of ideologues for fringe issues that weren't actually important to the healthy functioning of European civilization. And a large percentage of these middle class people, they agitated really hard. They were actually became very aggressive and very obnoxious on all these fringe issues. So these so-called high IQ people were suddenly transformed in about a decade, I noticed, into a bunch of social and political agitators. And they were essentially kicking the crap out of all the traditional values that had built European civilization. Now, as we went forward in the 1990s, the deindustrialization processes that were occurring all across the West, they started to become particularly bad here in Australia. Suddenly we had a lot of working class people were just being fired from their jobs. Now, the working classes weren't happy about this. Obviously, they liked to be gainfully employed. They liked to be contributing towards building and maintaining our Australian society. So there was a lot of bad feeling from the working classes, and people were really stunned. The deindustrialisation in the 90s, a lot of more sensible people thought this was a very, very bad policy, and they were openly saying this. However, at the same time, we were also seeing the rise of the tech bros. We were seeing the rise of the computing classes and the rise of the power of computers. We had suddenly the internet was getting more popular. Computers were playing a larger and larger role in regulating our society. And there was, older people might remember this. There was this point where the middle classes, a large percentage of them, suddenly became very obnoxious towards the working classes. And all these working class people there were welders and painters and carpenters, just good, decent, straightforward working class people who had a lot of very, very good, decent, practical skills. And suddenly they were told that they weren't wanted anymore. And you suddenly had these smug, arrogant intelligentsia classes, these middle class technocrats. A large number of them were just came out and they said to the working classes, "Oh, well, basically industrialization is not what the West is doing anymore. We're living in a post-industrial age. You guys need to learn to computer code. That's the future." Right? And even though I was a shit lib back in the 90s, I at least had enough common sense to realize that I was like, holy cow. Like, these middle class people as arrogant sons of a bitches, because for a start, these working class people, they have a very particular set of skills that are hard to learn and very important. It takes a long time to learn to be a good boilermaker, a good carpenter, a good plumber, all of these things, right? All of these things are very, very vital, important foundational skills that a country needs. But on top of that, the middle classes had the audacity to just tell these working class people who'd been made redundant, "Oh, well, just learn how to computer code and become this high IQ genius." Like, this high IQ tech bro genius, like, never mind you're laid off. Spend the next year and a half of your life just cramming computer coding, and then you'll have a job again. I just found this was one of the most this was a point. It was obnoxious, and this was a point where I really began to question the middle class intelligentsia, and their fundamental view of life was, not only was it completely wrong, it was completely arrogant. There was a real whiff of carrot up the arse with these guys by around about the mid-90s. And as I said, it really wasn't that bad in the 80s. The average middle-class intelligentsia person back in the 80s was moderately normal. Right? By the mid-90s, this haughty sort of hubris had crept into the mindset. And what was actually going on was these middle class clowns had got to this point where essentially their job had become just continually restructuring Western society to fit in with whatever dictates were coming down from on high. And these middle classes, when I talk about high IQ in a more modern sense, right, the middle classes, they have a reasonable amount of intelligence, but their intelligence, they only ever use it to fit in with whatever the system's demands are. So, as I said, back in the early 90s, they suddenly all began to become feminists and gay rights activists and refugee activists. And the reason is that at that point in time, around about the early 90s, the liberal system began to introduce these programs to the middle classes. So the middle classes, a large percentage of them, just adjusted their worldview. They adjusted themselves. Okay, we'll adjust ourselves and be tolerant now. We're going to have all this ideology based around tolerance. And essentially, this is where your civilization will start to fall down. It was around about the 90s that the middle classes, the intelligentsia, really did start to become self-serving lackeys of the liberal system. And they just began barking out these orders and commands for eternal restructuring of Western civilization. And ever since the early to mid-90s, that's what I have been seeing, is an eternal restructuring of society, of civilization, of our way of life. A never-ending revolution of our way of life. So we Western people now, for decades and decades on end, generations actually, basically we've had no foundations to our society anymore. The powers that be, the elites up the top, have ended up convincing our middle classes to become these self-serving technocrats that will now, for the rest of eternity, they will continually just keep reshaping and restructuring Western civilization to whatever the system demands. And the modern liberal system, its demands are that everybody is tolerant, everybody is hyper-liberal, everybody just fits in with whatever agenda is the current thing. And so what ends up happening over time is our European people have largely, the large body of European people have acquiesced to all these demands of the system. So we became more and more liberal, and we became more and more malleable. We have tolerated more and more restructuring and adjustments to our lives with every passing year. And it's now reached the point where European people are tolerating the intolerable. This is the final goal, is when you destroy a society through continual restructurement to the point where people will now accept the intolerable, then you actually have, basically you have complete control over the human system that you have underneath you. And this is a really huge thing. It's like, this is ginormous. This is where we're at now. European people are now being forced to tolerate the intolerable. You know, this, and a large part of this is thanks to these supposedly high IQ middle class people. And the whole problem is they've been using their high IQs to continually adjust and to continually tolerate whatever conditions the system throws in their face. But then they expect the rest of society, all the lower classes, the working classes, and the basic grunt classes, to all be dragged along, but behind these policies the middle class people are pushing. So the middle classes, by and large, realize that their position in society, in the technocratic regime, their position in the hierarchy, now it demands that they basically be an eternally tolerant and eternally malleable shitlib. Right? If a middle class person actually comes out and starts saying they don't like all the liberal policies that we're now living under, they will lose their job. They will lose their position in society. So essentially, to maintain your role as a middle class technocrat, you are basically now a pampered slave to the system. And it's your job to enforce the liberal system's policies on the lower orders of your society. So what we see here is that European civilization has now become completely top-heavy and topsy-turvy. It's now become an inversion where the most basic foundation of our society, which is our working classes, they've just been kicked around with a whole bunch of very, very bad policies for decades on end now by these middle-class shitlibs. And the middle-class shitlibs are doing this to the lower classes because essentially most middle-class shitlibs are cowards, and they're petty and greedy, and they just want to keep their job, their cushy job in the system. And so they're operating this shitlib machine on behalf of the elites who run Western civilization. And essentially what they call high IQ now is just your ability to recognize the patterns of the shitlib system and adapt yourself eternally to fit in with whatever dictates the shitlib system is throwing at you. And this now actually means, in the minds of middle-class shitlibs, this means their very survival. Essentially, they see that they're not just their paychecks and their job, but their actual position as a middle-class part of Western society basically hinges upon them being in an eternal revolution with themselves and waging an eternal revolutionary war upon their own society. And this eternal revolutionary war, it is the most cowardly sort of war imaginable. It's essentially, it's a war that's being run by people with the power of the pen. Right? The shit libs just sign they just ratify the orders that come from above with a pen. The elites that run our society just need this shit lib technocrat class to sort of argue a bit in public, have some public debates, and then ratify the policies that have come from above. So that's where we're at. And that's the high IQ delusion here in the West. It's essentially, it's this glue that holds the middle classes together still, to a large degree. And I still know middle class people that raise their children up, and they're like, all right, basically they tell their children, get a job with the government, because you'll get good pay, good conditions, your life will be pretty good if you work for the government. And what it means essentially is basically these children have to sell their European soul to fulfill the obligations of that job. You just have to be a totally cosmopolitan shit lib. That's the requirement. You have to be a very, very specific personality type. And if your personality is different, you're not going to qualify for that job. So in the end, this is how the elites that run Western society have standardized the intelligence set of the middle classes, and they have standardized the soul qualities of the middle classes. Right? There's no way you could be a white nationalist or even a white advocate and work in the technocratic middle management classes here in Western society anymore. So essentially, this is the process over a number of decades that the Western intelligentsia classes have been put through. 100 years ago, being intelligent meant that you did actually have to contribute valuable ideas that measurably improved Western society. Now you can just be the most mean-spirited, low-down shit-lib imaginable and be considered highly intelligent. The internet is full of these people, right? When you just look at mainstream YouTube or stuff and you see all these shit-lib commentators with their ghastly worldview, and they're essentially, these shit-lib commentators are interpreting the world, and they're pushing a certain world, a certain worldview on their fellow shit-libs. You know, all these Steven Pinkers and various other horrific kind of people. A large percentage, of course, are Jewish. Noam Chomsky, he's another one. There's dozens of them. I actually try to forget all these shit-lib people because they're so insignificant. But yeah, essentially, the liberal technocratic system now has become a closed system. It's now a cancer that's parasiting off the productive classes of Western society, and it needs to go. It needs to go sooner, not later. It has to be... We really have to think about strategies, not just how to combat these shit-lib technocratic classes, but we also need to dismantle them permanently. It needs to happen really, really soon, because our people cannot continue to labour under the destructive influence of the shit-lib regime that we're currently under. It's already destroyed the West, and the machine is out of control. It's continuing to destroy us. It needs to go. Okay, my brothers and sisters, thank you for listening. God be with you all. Deus Volt.